know what gave my boyfriend the audacity to ruin my marriage at all. I mean, I understand husbands being overprotective of what their wives wear, but I don't know who told my affair partner it was okay to get angry over my dress. Hey Reddit, my name is Sarah. I am 80 years old and my husband's name is Chris. He is 31 years old. Chris and we have been married for 3 years now. Before Chris and I got married, I was in a relationship with someone else. I knew my affair partner even before I met Chris. The name of my affair partner is Jerry. Jerry and I dated for 4 years before we both went our separate ways. We never broke up with each other. At that time, Jerry got a business offer that required him to move out of town. It was very difficult for the both of us, but we had no choice but to deal with it. Jerry was my first love. He was the first guy that I ever dated. Before Jerry and I got separated, we made a decision to date whoever we liked, just so we could move on fast. It was very hard for me at that time, knowing that we were going apart and didn't know how long it was going to be. When Jerry finally left, it took me time before I was able to get back on my feet to be able to date any other guy. Guys, I waited for Jerry for 2 whole years. We lost connection and I wasn't able to reach him. It was then I made up my mind to get into another relationship. That was when I met Chris at a book club gathering. I wasn't a lover of books, but I followed my aunt to that gathering. My aunt made me do things that would make me get over Jerry. Going to a book club was part of it. Even though it was boring, I had to do it for my aunt. One particular day, I met Chris there. He was the exact opposite of me. Chris loved reading books while I found them boring. A lot of things happened that night which I don't want to bore you all with. The most interesting part of it was that Chris liked me the moment he saw me. We literally talked throughout the entire night. From that day, Chris and I went out on dates before we finally tied the knots together a few months later. I know you all would say that I used Chris to get over Jerry, but guys, that's not it. I love Chris and didn't use him to heal. Maybe Chris loved more than I loved him. The love was genuine from my own end though. So guys, my husband and I lived normal lives like normal couples and everything moved fine. Getting married to Chris was one of my happiest moments. Then I had moved on from Jerry and had totally forgotten about him. I decided to focus on Chris and not to waste much time on Jerry. I was doing pretty well after my marriage when Jerry decided to show up after 3 years of not hearing a word from him. The day he got into town, he met with my childhood friend Maya and asked about me. Maya gave him my contact. That was how Jerry and I reconnected back with each other. At first, when Jerry called, I ignored the call because I didn't know who the caller was. It was an unknown number and I didn't pay much attention to it, but the caller kept calling non-stop and so I picked up the phone to know who it was. Immediately, I recognized the voice and knew at that moment that it was Jerry. Jerry and I had come a long way for me not to recognize his voice. That day I was with my husband when Jerry called. The moment I knew he was the one, I ended the call immediately. Luckily for me, my husband was focused on the movie we were watching before the call came in. I stood up and went into the room to talk to Jerry. When I called back, Jerry asked why I ended the call on him in that way. Jerry is very possessive and controlling. He also gets angry at any slightest provocation. Despite his bad character, I was so much in love with him. Jerry is mannerless but knows how to treat a woman well. Beneath his bad character, there's a nice and caring guy, just that he was too hot-tempered. No, guys, Jerry had never laid his hands on me since I knew him. In fact, he was overprotective of me anytime we stepped out. Jerry had one time beaten a guy that wanted to mess with me to a pulp right in my presence. He could be handful sometimes, but he's one of the sweetest people I have known. So guys, that day I had to apologize to Jerry for hanging up on him the way I did. At that moment, Jerry had no idea that I was married, and I didn't tell him that it was because of my husband I hung up on him the way I did. Jerry asked for us to see, and he sent me the address. It was one of the spots we usually met when we were still together. I was excited to meet Jerry after a long time. Immediately I got dressed to meet up with him. I told Chris I was stepping out to get some few things for myself. That was the only reasonable excuse I could come up with. The moment Jerry and I saw each other, we didn't hide our excitement. We hugged each other so tight for a few minutes. In the moment of excitement, Jerry and I shared a kiss. For a few seconds, I forgot that I was married. I couldn't stop Jerry because I had missed him so much. After a few minutes of hugging and kissing each other, Jerry and I sat down. We talked about a whole lot of things. I told Jerry how upset I was with the way he went radio silent on me for almost 3 years. Jerry told me that he didn't actually forget about me because he lost his phone and didn't know how to reconnect back with me. He told me he didn't stop thinking about me and kept hoping that I was doing fine wherever I was. Jerry also told me that he wanted us to get back together and continue from where we had stopped. I accepted immediately and didn't think twice about it, and also I didn't tell Jerry that I was married. I was also happy that Maya didn't mention the part that I was married to Jerry. After a few hours of chatting and catching up, we headed over to Jerry's apartment. Jerry told me that because of me, he would be coming to town thrice in every month to come see me and his friends. When Jerry never relocated to another city for work, we had a group of friends where we hung out together to have fun. But since Jerry left, the group wasn't the same like it used to be. Jerry was the life of the party and was good at bringing everyone together. Guys, Jerry's new apartment was really nice. It was better than the one he lived in before he relocated. Jerry gave me an indoor tour and it was very nice to see. Everything was neatly placed and in order. Jerry and I spent the rest of the day at his apartment. When it was getting late, I prepared to leave, but Jerry held me back and asked me to spend the night with him. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. Of course I wanted to, but I couldn't because my husband was expecting me to be back before dinner. I tried giving Jerry the excuse that I had work to do, but before I could say anything, Jerry kissed me. Things got heated up and we ended up on the bed. About 2 hours later, I got out of the bed and packed up to leave. At that time, Jerry was still on the bed. He asked me why I wanted to leave in such a hurry because we were meeting for the first time in a long time. I told him I needed to go because I had a proposal to finish up and a deadline to meet. I took my phone to check what time it was. On unlocking my phone, I saw a lot of missed calls from my husband. Guys, my husband had called me 6 times that night. I was shocked to not know when my phone rang. It was then I discovered that my phone had been on silent. To make matters worse, it was past 10 in the evening. I became very scared because I didn't know what to say to my husband when I got back home. I also did not know what to tell him to explain why I had missed his calls. I was so scared that I prepared myself to leave and ignored what Jerry was saying to me. When I was ready to leave, Jerry proposed to drop me off, but I refused and left the room in a haste. Luckily for me, I was able to get a cab and I got home in less than 30 minutes. When I got home, I met my husband already asleep on the couch. I thought to myself that he must have stayed up late to wait for me. The dining table was set that night. My husband put in a lot of effort and made dinner for us, but I didn't show up. Before I went to bed that night, I made sure to pack the leftovers and covered my husband up with a blanket. I didn't bother waking him up because he was deeply asleep. After taking a shower, I put on my nightwear to retire for the night. Just then, I got a text message from Jerry. He had asked if I had gotten home. I read the message but didn't respond. The next morning, my husband was very upset with me. Chris asked me where I went and what I was doing outside for that long. I had to lie that I went to visit my aunt who needed my help with something, and we got so busy that I had to stay out that late. He asked why I didn't pick when he called. I told him my phone was far from me and was sorry for not picking up. Chris wasn't buying all what I was telling him at that moment. But after explanation, Chris believed me and didn't stress further. I managed to calm him down when I told him I would prepare his favorite meal. I was happy that day that Chris wasn't angry for too long. I know you all would want to know if I felt guilty when I cheated on my husband with Jerry, right? Well, I did. But I wasn't too hard on myself. I was in love with both men and didn't know who to choose among them. Chris was my husband and I loved him very much at that time. He gave me the stability I needed, which was putting a roof over my head and footing the household bills. Jerry, on the other hand, was my boyfriend whom I never broke up with. Technically, we were still in a relationship at that time. We only got separated, and that was because he had a job opportunity in another city. Anytime Jerry came back to town, he would take me out and spend money on me. He bought lots of gifts and jewelry for me. To top it up, he sent me monthly upkeep. My husband took good care of me and gave me money, but it wasn't up to the amount Jerry spent on me every month. I loved the attention I got from both of them. So guys, my relationship with Jerry continued and we went out together. Jerry and his friends and I had a mutual Friday night gathering together. It was always fun coming together to have a fun time with the group. Jerry was the host of the gathering, and when he left, it died down, but Jerry was able to revive it back anytime he was in town. With the help of Jerry, we came together at least 3 Fridays in a month because he wasn't fully based in town. Anytime Jerry was around, he wanted us to go to the venue together like we used to do. Jerry's friends were aware that I was married, but didn't tell Jerry about it because it was none of their business. They felt like if Jerry was fine with it, then they had to mind their business. My husband knew about the Friday gathering. He always knew I was going to meet up with my friends, but didn't know that I was always going there with my boyfriend. It was during one of the Friday night gatherings that I came clean about my marriage to Jerry. Jerry seemed okay with it and didn't mind going out with me. It wasn't the kind of response I expected to hear from him, though. Jerry told me that he was comfortable with it so long we get to be together and spend time like we used to. I thought Jerry would be mad at me for taking so long to open up to him about it, but he wasn't. For a few minutes I was shocked, but I was at the same time happy that I didn't get scolded by Jerry because he was very good at that any time he was angry. My relationship with Jerry was secret, and I planned everything so perfectly so my husband won't suspect anything or have me followed around. I managed to do it so well for 5 months. Most times I wanted to be with Jerry because my husband's company wasn't enough for me. Anytime Jerry was in town, I was the happiest. I always spent the weekend with him before going back home. I used the Friday night gathering as an excuse to spend the night at Jerry's place. My husband thought I always spent the nights at Maya's like I usually told him, but didn't know it was at my affair partner's place. Jerry wouldn't even allow me to leave any time the gathering was over. It even got worse when he learned that I was married. He never wanted me to leave. He once told me that if he had not moved out of town, he would have made me leave my husband a long time ago. Jerry told me that he was capable of taking care of me and could give me double of whatever my husband was giving to me at that time. I loved Jerry so much at that time, but I wasn't ready to take that risk of leaving my husband. Even if Jerry hadn't relocated, I won't even consider divorcing my husband. I also loved my husband as much as I loved Jerry. So guys, Jerry and I hooked up anytime he was in town. We did it for some months, and we were too careless. Just one day, I discovered that I was pregnant. I felt a bit nauseous and feverish for some few days, and decided to run a test in the hospital. It was my first time getting pregnant, and I didn't know any of the early symptoms. When I learned about the test results, I knew immediately that the pregnancy wasn't for my husband, but Jerry. Chris and I had a mutual agreement not to get pregnant until we were both ready, and we always used protection. I forgot about that and got lost with Jerry, and sometimes Jerry wouldn't use protection because he was impatient. That time, I didn't know whether to be happy or sad. I was also anxious to tell Jerry about it because I didn't know if he was going to accept it or not. When I got back home from the hospital that day, I texted Jerry that I had something really important to share with him when he got back. After a few days, Jerry got back to town, and I wasted no time to pay him a visit. Jerry was anxious to hear what was so important that I couldn't wait to tell him, so I handed over the test results so he could see for himself. Jerry read through it for a few minutes and gave me back the slip. For a few seconds, he didn't say a word. I asked him why he got moody after finding out that I was pregnant. Jerry told me that he would give me 2 options, and it was left for me to decide which one to go with. The first option Jerry gave me was getting rid of the pregnancy, and the second one was for me to pin it on my husband because he wasn't ready to become a father. He made it clear that he would support me in whichever option I decided, but wouldn't support me if I did anything other than the ones he gave me. I was surprised to hear Jerry say that to me. I got pregnant for him, and he had the audacity to tell me to either get rid of it or pin it on my husband. I got angry with him that day and left. A few days later, I told my husband that I was pregnant with our child. Yes, I had no option but to pin it on Chris. My husband was so happy to hear that from me, but he was shocked. I just made up the story that I wasn't on my birth control for a while, and that's how it happened. It wasn't a complete lie because I had stopped my birth control at some point. Christ trusted me, and we even had a small celebration on the good news that day. I told Jerry about the new development, even though I was mad at him and Jerry seemed not to be bothered about it. I was happy that my husband accepted it and didn't suspect anything. So guys, a few weeks after I got pregnant, Chris made it his duty to take extra care of me. He didn't allow me to stress myself too much on anything. Anywhere I went, he was always by my side if he was less busy. It even got to a point where my husband wanted to go with me to the Friday night gathering. That day he closed very early from work and said he would like to go with me to the gathering so that he could keep an eye on me and make sure I won't take any alcoholic drink. When Chris told me that I was anxious about him coming along with me, at that time Jerry wasn't in town and didn't plan on coming that particular Friday because he was caught up with work, and so I was not too bothered about my husband coming. But I was anxious because I didn't know how our mutual friends would behave towards Chris since it was his first time. I thought about it for a while but decided to go with my husband since he wanted us to go to the gathering together. I didn't want to give him a reason to be suspicious because, for some reason, Chris was excited to go. Funnily enough, he even got dressed before me. I spent time on picking a dress to wear. I had 2 options and didn't know which one to choose. My husband helped me pick it up and I ended up wearing it. It was a simple gown with a little opening at the chest region. It was body fitted and my husband was okay with me wearing it to the gathering. After I was done dressing up, we left the house and headed straight to the venue. On our way there, I was a little bit happy that I was going there with my husband. Chris only likes going to book clubs or any gatherings that read literature. My husband hardly goes out to party or have fun. I was always the one going out with friends and sleeping outside. I couldn't believe I took Chris for granted and even cheated on him with my boyfriend. To couple it up, I pinned a pregnancy on him and he didn't question me. He accepted it wholeheartedly because he thought he was responsible. At that moment, I wished my husband and I would continue to be close, and I didn't want anything else. So guys, we got to the venue on time, and the moment I walked in with Chris, everyone stared at us. They were surprised that I had brought Chris along. My husband didn't notice the awkwardness in the hall because he had no idea that I was dating the head of the squad. We had a rule that any new member would do a brief introduction. Chris introduced himself and didn't fail to mention that I was his wife. After the introduction, it was mandatory for the new member to take some shots. My husband did it even though he wasn't a fan of alcohol. I was happy at that moment that my husband was getting along with the group. I didn't expect it to happen so fast. We also played games together, and it was an interesting one at that. During the time we were playing games together, I got a text message from Jerry. He messaged me to tell me that he took care of his work and was in town. The moment I read the message, I became surprised and didn't expect Jerry to show up at that place. To make matters worse, my husband was in that same gathering. I didn't know what to do at that moment. Just when I was about to reply to Jerry's text message, my husband asked me for a dance. It was time for dance. I didn't even notice because I was lost in my own thoughts. I wasn't in the mood to dance, but my husband dragged me to the dance floor, something he hardly did. I thought maybe he was tipsy at that moment, but he wasn't. My husband just wanted to have fun with me, and also wanted to get to know the kind of companies I kept. After much persuasion from my husband, I got onto the dance floor and we started dancing. Mai and I got carried away by the beat and danced really hard. Just at that moment, my phone beeped again and saw it was another text message from Jerry. By that time, he had gotten into the hall. I got a lot of messages from him all at once. Jerry texted me to come over to his place and that I should stop dancing with my husband the way I did, because he wasn't comfortable with it. He also asked how I was even that close with my husband to the extent we were having a dance together. I ignored all of his messages and continued dancing with Chris before I was anxious and didn't know what to do. He also tagged my outfit as too revealing for his liking. I knew what I had on was provocative and revealing, and even Chris had commented on how revealing it was, but I still chose to wear it. I got really upset because the fact that Jerry was my boyfriend at that time didn't give him that audacity to tell me how I should relate with my husband, or the type of dress I should put on. He didn't also have the right to tell me to leave my husband and come over to his place. I got irritated with his messages, and that was why I didn't go over to meet him. When Jerry saw that I wasn't coming over, he decided to come over to the dance floor to embarrass me. Jerry pulled me over from my husband's grip and asked me what type of dress I had on because it was too revealing. He even had the effrontery to say he wasn't comfortable with the way I was dancing with my husband in his presence. Immediately, my husband asked if Jerry was okay, or was drunk to have stopped us from dancing because we were married. My husband told Jerry that I was his wife and he didn't have the right to do what he had done. Jerry immediately asked my husband to shut up and told him that his wife, who was me, was also his girlfriend and that I was cheating on him with Chris. At that moment, I was shocked to hear Jerry shutting my husband up. Jerry had no manners to begin with. My husband didn't believe what he heard and told Jerry that he was drunk and just wanted to create an unnecessary scene. Jerry responded and said he would prove it to my husband that I was his girlfriend and that we had been dating even before Chris and I got married. I tried to signal Jerry to keep quiet, but he refused to listen to me. I never imagined that he would try to ruin my life like that. At that moment, Jerry brought out his phone and showed my husband pictures of us together. That only confirmed everything, that I was truly dating Jerry at that time. My husband was so disappointed to know that I was cheating on him. Guys, Jerry didn't only show my husband the pictures, he also told Chris that the pregnancy I was carrying was not his, and that I planned pinning it on him after he rejected it. At that point, everyone in the hall was shocked to hear that. Jerry went as fast as asking Chris to ask me if everything he had said was a lie. My then husband looked at me and called me by my name. For the first time since my husband started dating a few years ago, he had never called me by my name. That day was very bad. My husband yelled so loud and demanded an answer. I couldn't say anything because I knew there was no way out. My silence at that moment said it all to Chris. My husband told me how disgusted he was after hearing that I tried to pin a pregnancy that wasn't his on him. What got him even more upset was the fact that he was overly excited about the news of the pregnancy. My husband turned to leave, but I held him back by his shirt and pleaded with him. He told me to let go of his shirt before he did something stupid. Immediately I let it go, and he left. I made a move to run after my husband, but Jerry held me back. He asked me where I planned on going because he wasn't done with me at that moment. I told Jerry to let go of my hand, but he didn't. Jerry told me that the only way I could get out of the hall was when I had wired him all the money he had been giving to me in the past few months. He told me he didn't care if I'd spend a dime from it because I was going to return every penny he had spent on taking care of me. At that moment, I brought out my phone and made a transfer to Jerry because, honestly speaking, I didn't really spend any of his money since Chris also gave me money. I only saved Jerry's money, and since he asked for it, I gave him back because I couldn't stand him. I couldn't believe he wanted a refund for taking care of me after how many years we had dated. Clearly, I was stupid to have taken Jerry back after he ghosted me for 3 years before he returned. I should have moved on and concentrated on my marriage, but I didn't. Jerry even told me that it was over between us, that he couldn't be with someone that cheats. At that moment, everything that Jerry was saying didn't matter to me. I was bent on going after my husband and trying to have a talk with him. Jerry humiliated me in front of our friends. He claimed to love me at that time, but his actions showed otherwise. Who would ask for a refund for taking care of someone they claimed to have loved for years? Guys, at that point I realized that Jerry used me to have fun. I should have known from when I told him about the pregnancy. His reaction said it all, but I was too dumb to walk away. I continued my relationship with him and didn't break it off. Everyone at the party had 1 or 2 things to say. What happened became a thing of gossip to them. That day I ran out of the hall in shame. What was supposed to have been a fun gathering ended up to be a disaster, and it was all because of Jerry. I have known Jerry to be an overprotective guy. He always gets jealous anytime he sees me with other guys. And he couldn't take the fact that I was with my husband, because he knew I wouldn't leave as I usually do, anytime I was with another guy. That night it was difficult to find a cab around. I ran to an extent before I could get a taxi. On my way back home, I bursted into tears. I realized at that moment that my affair with Jerry had cost me my marriage. With the way my husband walked out of the hall, I knew that I was in big trouble. I got home that night, but didn't meet Chris. I called him to know his whereabouts, but he kept on cutting the call. For 2 days, my husband didn't return home. I was so worried about him. At that time, I wanted to hear his voice to know if he was okay, but he didn't respond to any of my calls and messages. When my husband finally returned back home, he asked me what I was still doing in his house. He told me he didn't expect to meet me at the house by then. I told Chris that I was sorry about everything and that he should give me a chance to explain myself. My husband replied to me and said there was nothing to explain at that moment because it was meaningless to him and he wasn't interested to hear it. Chris told me I had 2 days to pack out of his house because he was done with the marriage. My husband said he has freed me to go and meet with my affair partner and build a family together. I told Chris that Jerry and I were no longer together because he had broken up with me that night. I pleaded with Chris to take me back because I had nowhere else to go or who I would run to for help. Chris told me that I should tell that to whoever wants to hear that gibberish because he wasn't interested. He made it clear to me that he didn't want to be with me any longer. I was very confused at that point. Leaving Chris for me at that time meant starting all over again. I had no work to do that could earn me money. I was living off of my husband's money and the money Jerry spent on me. I resigned from my previous work because I had everything I needed and didn't see the need to stress myself too much. Not working at that time was a big mistake. Guys, my husband meant it when he said he wanted me out. The 2 days he gave me elapsed, and I thought my husband had changed his mind about me. I was relaxed that I didn't take anything he said to me seriously. I woke up on the second day to meet my luggages outside. My husband pulled me out of the house and threw me out. He told me to leave his house and never show my face. Even in my condition, Chris still sent me packing. He didn't call to check on me to know about my well-being. I had nowhere to go at that time, and he didn't show any concern about it. I still can't believe that Jerry's possessiveness over me and the outfit I wore made him go to extreme lengths to ruin my life. Update. Hi, fellow Redditors. This is an update to my last post. So Chris didn't contact me until I gave birth to my child. He contacted me so we could do a DNA test. The test proved that Chris wasn't the father of my child, and he was happy because that's all he wanted. He waited that long so the divorce would be less complicated for him. We eventually went to court and proceeded with the divorce. I got no child support or anything tangible from the divorce. Chris wasn't the father of my child, and he wasn't ready to take care of another man's child. I tried reaching out to Jerry to have the DNA test done, but he hasn't responded to any of my messages. Without his compliance, it's difficult to carry out the test. Jerry knows he's the father of my child, but doesn't want to have any responsibility. After that incident that night at the Friday night gathering, I haven't set my eyes on Jerry. I have tried my best to trace him, but I still can't get through to him. I went to his house and found strange people living there. I tried asking them about Jerry, but they seemed not to know who Jerry is. I really don't know if they knew, but were instructed not to give out information about Jerry to anyone, because Jerry knew I would come looking for him. When things got tough for me, I went over to the house to ask Chris if he could lend me some money, even though he had strictly told me never to come over to the house for anything. Doing that didn't help at all because he had made up his mind. If I had known things would turn out this way, I wouldn't have hooked up with Jerry. Now I'm facing the consequences of my mistake. Things have been difficult lately, guys. My life has not remained the same ever since my husband and I both parted ways. I have not moved on at all. Taking care of myself and my child has really not been easy for me. I had the opportunity to build a good family with Chris, but I messed it up with my selfish desire. Sometimes I wish I had never crossed paths with Jerry, because he had caused me nothing but pain. Just when I was living the best life, Jerry showed up and made me believe that he still loved me, which he didn't. I was really a fool to have thought something meaningful could have come out of it. Now,